Okay, welcome to Pièces de Resistance, an extraordinary benefit series celebrating Alaska Quarterly Review's 40th anniversary. I'm Heather Lindy. You can join us Sundays through April for free live online readings and conversations featuring exceptional new, emerging, and established poets and writers who've been published in AQR. The series is hosted by the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center, and while all the events are free, AQR, like many literary magazines today and journals, could use your help, so please consider making a donation. I'd like to introduce Ron Spatz, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review, a professor of English at the University of Alaska. Ron is a former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow and the recipient of 2 Alaska Governor's Awards and a Contribution to Literacy Award from the Alaska Center for the Book. Under his 4 decades of leadership and vision, AQR has created strong connections between Alaska and the larger literary community, and we'll be seeing the fruit of some of those connections today in the US and abroad. And AQR has been influential, especially in supporting new and emerging writers, as well as presenting works that, again, the readers that you will hear today and the writers exemplify as a rigorous questioning of larger societal issues. So, Ron?
Thank you, Heather, and welcome everyone. This event is being recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and Web 907 for its web support, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes Indigenous land on which Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional present and future caretakers of this land. Acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of Indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movement toward decolonization and equity. And now to begin, Heather Lindy will introduce today's featured poets, Sean Hill, Elizabeth Bradfield, and Robert Wrigley. Heather is the author of 4 books of nonfiction, all published by Algonquin. If you lived here, I'd know your name. Take good care of the garden and the dog. Find the Good, which is also this year's Alaska Reads book, and her recently published Of Bears and Valleys. Heather?
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all 3 of the writers right now at the front, so that we get to hear them uninterrupted, or perhaps we'll have time at the end for a couple of questions or some interactions to hear them talk to each other about their work. Sean Hill is going to be reading first, and Sean was born and raised in Midville, Georgia, and is the author of 2 poetry collections, Dangerous Goods, awarded the Minnesota Book Award in Poetry, and Blood Ties and Brown Liquor, named one of the 10 books all Georgians should read in 2015 by the Georgia Center for the Book. He's received numerous awards, including fellowships from Cave Canem, the Region 2 Arts Council, the Bush Foundation, the Minnesota State Arts Board, the Jerome Foundation, the McDowell Colony, the University of Wisconsin, a Stegner Fellowship from Stanford, and a Creative Writing Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. His poems and essays have appeared in many journals, including the Harvard Review, Orion, Poetry, Tin House, and in dozens of anthologies. He has served as the director of the Minnesota Northwards Writers Conference at Bemidji State University since 2012, is a consulting editor at Broadsided Press, which is published by Elizabeth Bradfield, who's also here today, has taught at several universities, including at the University of Alaska Fairbanks and Georgia Southern as an assistant professor. Hill lives in Montana with his family and will be visiting professor of creative writing at the University of Montana for the 2020-2021 academic year, and he is a contributing editor to AQR. Sean has said that his work is rooted in questions of race and how power plays into those. Quote, I think about the way we refer to the civil rights movement as a struggle, he says. Elizabeth Bradford is the author of Toward Antarctica, Once Removed, Approaching Ice, Interpretive Work, and Theorem, a collaboration with artist Antonia Contro, and lots of anthologies from Poem a Day, 365 Poems for Every Occasion, to This Assignment is So Gay, LGBTIQ Poets on the Art of Teaching. Her poems and essays have appeared in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Orion, and elsewhere, and she too has many honors, including the James Laughlin Award from the Academy of American Poets, a Stegner Fellowship as well, a Bread Loaf Scholarship, and as I said, she's founder-in-chief of Broadsided Press, and also an Alaska Quarterly Review contributing editor. She was born and raised in Tacoma, has an MFA from the University of Alaska Anchorage, and lives on Cape Cod with her partner, works as a naturalist locally, as well as on expedition ships around the globe, Antarctica, for instance. She teaches creative writing at Brandeis. And she has said that writing and natural history are both more than careers for her. They are vocations, callings, and passions, and her work emphasizes the ecological and social connections. She has said that environmental justice has to be social justice as well. And both she and Sean appear in the short film Earth, People, Words with Joy Harvo. It's 13 minutes well spent if you have time. Like Elizabeth and Sean, Robert Wigley is also deeply rooted in place. He was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, and was the first person in his family to graduate from college and the first male for generations not to work in a coal mine. He's earned his MFA from the University of Montana, where he studied with, among other poets, Alaska icon John Haynes. His collections of poetry include Bach's Anatomy of Melancholy, which was the winner of the Pacific Northwest Book Award, Beautiful Country, Lives of the Animals, winner of the Poets Prize, Reign of Snakes, won the Kingsley Tufts Award, In the Bank of Beautiful Sins, and like our two other poets today, Robert believes that poetry can influence the world and people's lives rather than just reside within the confines of academia. His poems are concerned with rural Western landscapes and humankind's place within the natural world. And he says he aims to tell all the truth, but make it sing. He has won numerous acclaims, as well as 5 Pushcart Prizes, fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, Rockefeller Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, and has taught at Lewis and Clark State College, Warren Wilson College, the University of Oregon, the University of Montana, and the University of Idaho. And he lives in Idaho with his wife, the writer Kim Barnes. So now this is going to be a great afternoon, well spent here in Alaska, and evening maybe wherever you are. And we're going to begin with Sean.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank, of course, Heather again, and Ron, Spatz, and AQR, and the Anchorage Museum, which is an awesome place. I got to read there once, which was an incredible experience. And Rebecca and Cody, and of course, Elizabeth Bradfield and Robert Wrigley, 2 poets, 2 people that I greatly admire. The first poem I want to read this evening, it's titled Musica Universalis in Fairbanks. And it was the first poem I published in AQR. It was inspired by my early days in Alaska. I lived in Fairbanks for 5 winters. As Heather said, I taught at the university where I had great colleagues and students, and I feel fortunate that I was able to work with my dear friend and colleague, the late poet Derek Burleson. Derek actually introduced me to Robert Wrigley and Kim Barnes, and he brought them up to be visiting writers. He was always connecting people. I miss him. Musica Universalis in Fairbanks. Each night, this 21st century frontier town settles enough for me to hear the thrum and hiss in my ears, my tinnitus, which I choose to think of as the harmony of my firmament, all so far away, like the whoosh and hiss from Nana's gas heater that warmed the winter-chilled bedroom in Georgia while she got the skillet sizzling with country-cured ham in the kitchen. My refrigerator occasionally wakes this hour to clear its throat and rumble on over the sounds in my ears. And some nights I get out of bed to go stand under the generosity of stars here. I've decided that must be the collective noun for all the stars in one's gaze, as it must also be for any number of scars. The way we refer to a flock of starlings as a murmuration. I stand there and use my hand to shade my eyes from the streetlights to better see the stars. Our new light competes with the old, the way the clamor of our fleets in this age after sails is said to interfere with the songs of whales. Here, I sometimes see the aurora borealis, silent, which seems impossible, like the end of the world for what we know of light in the sky, lightning, and its often not far off companion thunder, seems to say something will always follow. Some say the northern lights sizzle, an impossibility, a synesthetic weaving of the senses exalting this light, or a lark, like the bird, which we call an exaltation when in numbers great or small, more than a handful, the way a friend used to count lovers when we were younger, told me he was on to the second hand, love, while a lark still handled carefully in those days. I should drive out of town to view these lights against the sky black as a raven. They often fly in pairs or groups, a conspiracy, a storytelling, an unkindness of ravens. While I was in Alaska, I met my wife and we decided to have a child. And this poem grew out of, or was inspired by, spewed from the experience of going to the first ultrasound. Hello. She, being the midwife and your mother's longtime friend, said, I see a heart. Can you see it? And on the gray display of the ultrasound, there you were as you were, our nugget. In that moment, becoming a shrimp or a comma, punctuating the whole of my life, separating its parts before and after, a shrimp in the sea of your mother, and I couldn't help but see the fast beating of your heart translated on that screen and think and say to her, to the room, to your mother, to myself, it looks like a twinkling star. I imagine I'm not the first to say that. Unlike the first moments of my everyday, the new of seeing you was the first, deserving of the definite article, moment I saw a star at once so small and so big, so close and getting closer every day, I pray. And this one's a fairly new poem. father speaks to his son about reckless behavior. I've seen the spoils of recklessness and come to understand all we have are these breaths we take to make of them what we will till our deaths. All I desire to share with you, one way to sum up my life. There's so much sky I wanted to tell my father about. These days, I'm daunted by what we've not done. These days, I'm haunted by the future and shook by the past, which attests to some pillaging the world, leaving just a crumb for others in acts of malice or breathtaking recklessness. I've seen the spoils of recklessness and come to know the disregard for those beneath being taunted. Son, we soon need to lay some behemoths low to honor the fact that all we have are the breaths of our lives. Defy what collides with the sacred. This next poem comes from my second collection, Dangerous Goods. I was researching the history of my hometown, Milledgeville, Georgia, for my first collection, Blood Ties and Brown Liquor. And I came across a mention of people emigrating, leaving central Georgia and going to Liberia. And there was a couple of stories that were written up in the newspaper, and one story caught my attention, in part because the man who was named there, his name was Sandy Ganaway. And I was like, I have to write a poem about a guy who left named Sandy Ganaway. I did more research and I found out that Sandy was born around the turn of the 19th century in Milledgeville, born into slavery, and was old by the time he left for Liberia. And I thought that maybe perhaps, actually more than perhaps, he says it in the newspaper articles, he was not happy in Liberia. So he came back to Georgia and got stuck halfway back in New York. Ganaway returns, 1874. Broke in New York and trying to get home, old Sandy Ganaway, older than Milledgeville by a couple of years, wants to get back to where he'd been freed after being owned before being born, home, Georgia. He's seen Africa, and Liberia in nearly every way did not agree with the old man. Recognized faces, but didn't know the natives like folks back home, and never took a liking to the food or the way the light shone. Liberia, created for those folks freed after being owned before being born. And old Sandy Ganaway, never embraced as mother and long-lost son, returned home. It couldn't hold him the way the land of his fathers, owners and owned, held on. Where old Sandy Ganaway can conceive of dying, as each and every man must, is the land he knows like his wife's arms. Where does home come from? The same place as race? Man is always inventing things, such as nations, like Liberia and America, where Sandy was freed after being owned before being born. Here's another new poem, fairly new poem. Milledgeville was the antebellum capital of Georgia and the Confederate capital of Georgia. And During that period, the governor's mansion there, the men who came into office would select slaves from their plantations to bring to the governor's mansion to be the household servants. So, and I ended up writing a poem sort of about that. Governor's Mansion's Hands, Milledgeville, Georgia, 1858. The hand in which the laws of the land were penned was that of a white man. Hand, servant, same as bondsman, slave, and necessarily a Negro in this context. But not all Blacks were held in bondage. Though bound by the constructed fetters of race, that expedient economic tool for making a class of women and men kept in place based on the color writ across their faces, a conservative notion for keeping power in the hands of the few. It kept the threat held over the heads of all Negroes, including those free Blacks, who after the coming war would be called the formerly free people of color, once we were all ostensibly free. Hands, enslaved, handled clay and mulls in the making of bricks to build this big house for the gathering of those few men with their white faces who hold power like the end of the rope. Hand, what's needed to wed, and a ring or broom. Hand, a horse measure, handy in horse trading. We also call the pointers on the clock that go around marking time in this Occidental fashion, handy for business transactions. Hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Very much to think about. And thank you especially for sharing new poems with us. And next up, we have Elizabeth.
Oh man, Sean, I loved hearing those poems. Thank you. Thank you for that. The way that language kind of keeps turning and returning and rediscovering itself in your work is just one of the things that I love about your poems. I'm going to set the timer so I don't do something rude and talk for too long, but I'm really grateful to be here tonight for so many reasons. To be affiliated with the Anchorage Museum, which is such an amazing institution through this reading series, is phenomenal. And my relationship with folks here, Sean and Robert Wrigley and Ron Spatz and Alaska Quarterly Review, is really deep and meaningful to my life as a writer. If we go chronologically, Robert Wrigley was one of the first living poets whose work I really fell in love with, along with Tess Gallagher and Lee Young Lee. And he was a visiting writer when I was an undergraduate at University of Oregon. And he doesn't know it, or maybe he does, but I was really influenced by his voice, his words, his clarity, and followed his work ever since then from afar. And I've been very lucky to have in my life gotten to hear more of his work over the years. Sean and I met first at Bread Loaf in, I think it was 2001. And since then we formed a really close friendship through first when he brought poems to Broadsided Press, then when we were Stegner Fellows together and our first books came out together, we traveled around together reading from our books. And in terms of poets who I turn to as my siblings in poetry, the people that I trust and rely on, Sean is one of those people that I really, really love. And but also as a co-editor with Broadsided Press and other projects. And I just have so much admiration for his poems and also for the work he does in the world. And then Ron and AQR, when I went to University of Alaska, Anchorage, when I started the graduate program there, I had, right before accepting my my acceptance to the MFA program, I had a poem accepted to AQR. And so when I arrived, Ron kind of pulled me aside and he's like, we don't publish our students. And from that conversation, a really rich engagement and just advocacy for the arts developed. And I'm so grateful for Alaska Quarterly Review, for the chances I had as a graduate student to read poems for them to help with the reading series, and for the conversations I've had since graduating with Ron himself. Just a few weeks ago, Ron came and spoke to my undergraduate class at Brandeis. We were talking about literary editing and publishing, and my students, the thing that they took away from that conversation, of many amazing things that Ron brought into the room, was the idea of editing as an art in and of itself. And it really realigned their understanding of what a literary journal, what an editor could do, what you could shape, what you can bring into the world. And I think what Ron has done with AQR in bringing voices together and keeping an eye on just really trying to find excellent and wonderful work has been such an admiration for me. I'm grateful to be part of AQR in a peripheral way now. I'm grateful for the opportunities they've given me and for tonight. So I thought I'd start with that first poem that AQR published. And I thought I'd mostly read poems that have been published in AQR over the years. And one exception, one newer poem as an exception. But this is that first poem, which ended up being part of my first book, Interpretive Work. And it's titled The Oarfish, which is an amazing creature, kind of detailed a little bit in the poem. The Oarfish. It took 3 people to carry its length, sagging between their hands, from the rack line where they found it down to the water's edge. From a distance, just a pale smear along the beach, probably garbage, probably a ride of sand, driftwood, but something in its snaked lie made them walk up and look, and then lift it. I wasn't there, but have stared so often at the snapshot, I'm convinced I could have been. And that's good enough, isn't it? To look at a picture and feel the sun on your shoulders, the dead weight of the fish, the shifting rocks underfoot, hot through the thin soles of canvas shoes, the smell of insect repellent and decay. This strange long weight that they picked up, serpent, discovery, trophy, documentation, a thing no one else they'll ever know will have seen. Yes, they'll nod to the guidebooks. It's like that, but not quite. The red was more subtle, the belly not so sleek. We held it. Scales glimmered on our skin after. I wish I had been there. It's curled and ghostly on the wall. They picked it up and smiled. They sighted down the long fin of its dorsal, the 2 plumes trailing from its head, flaring like oars, rested on the inside of their upturned arms. So this next poem is another poem from that same book that also first appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review. And with the upcoming election, I thought I would bring this kind of back into the world, a poem written on the eve of another election, from a moment in which the self and the political sphere around the self kind of come into collision, not kind of, do. So this was written in November 2004, but it's titled Site-Specific Adaptations. This winter, I became a man. It happened the first week of November while my girlfriend guided photo tours of polar bears. For a week in Manitoba, she wakes, eats, and rides the tundra buggies with tourists over eskers, lending story to what they see. This year, though, another landscape competes with what's running the boreal tree line. She and I are on the ballot. Our home, our tax burden, and hospital visitation rights in 11 states. She's wary, bans talk of the election, but still, to some of them, she looks suspect, short-haired, short-nailed, with a walk that's wide and expects to be made way for. Out on the tundra, she tries to keep them focused. Look at the fox digging for its cache of meat. But no bears in sight. A bored wife turns from the view saying, "So, have you left anyone at home?" My lover says, "A gyrfalcon. Until the last few years, we knew almost nothing of their nesting habitats." It's November 2nd. 4 more days with this group, 7 with the next, then she'll come home to me. What weather they're having, mid-20s and clear. Bears at the bay's edge in golden light, testing the new ice, hungry for seal. 4 more days in the buggy, 4 more dinners of careful talk. My husband is a poet, she finally says, for the first time not risking this truth and hating that what she loves could bring her to this lie. There's a couple other poems I want to read that are not yet collected, but hopefully will be in the future, maybe actually just one of them. I've been working on these series of poems about Admiral Donald B. McMillan, who was an Arctic explorer born and raised in Provincetown, next door to where I live now on Cape Cod, and spent his life going up to the Arctic, taking folks up north. And I suppose in many ways, this is a pandemic related poem because he was up there during the time of the Spanish influenza. And as letters came north, the folks there would open the letters, and guess what came out? Germs, in addition to news, etc. So I was thinking a lot about that transmission over many, many miles. And I wrote a more narrative poem, but this is a more associative poem, kind of engaging with the same question that first was published in AQR. It's titled "Regarding the Absent Heat of Your Skin on Letters I Receive While at Sea." Paper wing, words smudged in your hand stroke, what has been sealed, torn mouth, lung must, and a shiver along my lateral line, olfactory lobe lit up, breath on the paper, wind on the water and off it, breath from the water and ill wind, tear salt, fish near the surface glinting, plankton rising, forced, scent of panic. Lung must, petrels arrive because of, patter and feed. Your eyes on the horizon are greedy, could eat leagues. Call my name. Breeze, wind, gale, let the air clock around your mouth. It pushes unturned against your mouth. If you stand on the shore and call, I'll know. I have 2 other poems I want to read before we get to hear Robert Wrigley's amazing work. This next one is titled "The Truro Bear," which is after a poem of the same title by Mary Oliver. But she wrote her poem before we actually had a bear on Cape Cod, or in the in-between time when there hadn't been bears for a long time. And this first appeared again in AQR. And I had been missing Alaska so much when I moved back to Cape Cod after living there. The Truro Bear. I am lonely for the bear, 2 towns south and heading here. The bear, too, is lonely. For what other reason would it swim the canal, then walk the whole of the Cape toward us? Mornings, we rise early, drive, look in places we'd like to see it. Evenings, the same. Scat, a track, a tuft of hair would be enough. We don't mind ticks or briars, although we're troubled when highway drivers spot it and not us. One man catches it on infrared in his backyard, light bulb of a hind end, narrow legs sauntering. Orleans, Wellfleet, Depot Road, then at Bradford and Conwell, the busiest corner in town. This will be the summer I don't return to Alaska. This will be the summer I won't visit the woods where I learned to walk with bears. One afternoon, in the height of it, steaming home from a day on the water, no bear at Race Point, no bear at High Head. We pick up a distress call from a boat off Wood End Point. The black bear has lost power, is being set ashore. We turn west, stare. The black bear, I'm not kidding. Rust stains every plank of its dark hull. We watch the crew dig out an anchor, drop it. We stand by until they feel it catch. Bob says they made the same call yesterday. The next day, or the one after, officials dispatch teams with darts and nets, and the bear is gone. Things are fine for a while, although our market chit-chat feels small and mean. Then we hear it's headed our way. We hear it's climbed a Boston suburbs tree where they shot it and trucked it west again to the woods they think it came from. But it was coming back. It had found plenty here, berries, acorns, skate tails on the beach, ground unclaimed. I was lonely at that age. I wandered, restless. Now I will be, the woods will be, the ponds and bogs and briars will be so lonely for the bear. We know how alive we were at its low shrug. For a while, at least, we were re-enchanted, our gossip urgent and hopeful. We loved our loneliness then. Thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you, Elizabeth, very much. And now, Robert.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It's a great pleasure to be here with Sean and with Elizabeth, whose poems I love. They're wonderful poets. I'm going to read, I think, just 4. This one is called Being a Lake. He has never dreamed of being a lake in the high mountains, and now he wonders why. Surely there could be no better in the way of dreamy aspirations. To be clear, cold, and swum through by trout. To allow the sunlight far into your depths, to have depths no one will ever visit. To be ceilinged by ice and many feet of snow in winter. To shine pure blue into the pure blue of the sky, to show the stars, to be drunk by wild animals, and to admit an occasional human who, because of the memory of having been there, might dream of being there. Not a visitor, but a dreamer, dreaming this very lake is what he's always wanted to be. This next poem actually appeared in AQR, thanks to Elizabeth Bradfield, as a matter of fact.
I think we're having some trouble hearing you, Robert. Is anybody else noticing that? I'm not sure what we can do about it.
It looks like it's just a delay in his Wi-Fi. Robert, if you can hear us, just maybe refresh and try again.
I love my cowbirds, perched on the withers or the croup, from which they'd pluck up the occasional otherwise horse-annoying insect. And the cowbirds rode across the pasture at me, where I stood, as I often stood, with apples or sugar cubes in my pocket. They stood with horses on the north side of the trough, while I stood on the south, one bird each remaining on the croup, having the side of me retreated almost to the dock, the uppermost trace of the tail. 2 horses, 2 birds, 2 frogs having dived to the bottom, and a man with a pocket full of sugar cubes. They were beginning to understand the drill, the horses. I wanted them to drink first. They knew it, but they were impatient. First one, then the other dipped his snout water and looked up at me, hopeful, ready, though I waited, my arms folded over my chest. I wanted to see them drink, and they did, lapping, sometimes plunging their muzzles deep below the surface to gulp, sometimes in the process remembering how thirsty they must have been, and taking in great draughts, pints or more, although eventually one stopped and lifted his head, then the other, and I produced 2 sugar cubes from my pocket and arranged one on each palm and held them out, and their soft, hoarse lips and now cold tongues lifted the cubes into their mouths, and I heard a single crunch and watched as joy swept across their faces. When I produced 2 more sugar cubes, we repeated the process, and we waited again. Because I did not walk away, they believed I had more, as I did, but still I waited. And the frogs swam in the trough, and the cowbirds hunted bugs near the docks. Then one by one, the horses both drank again, a little less than before, then lifted their heads and looked at me. Spoiled, yes, and probably lazy. 2 geldings we owned for several years, having rescued them from a stable where they sometimes spent days at a time in their stalls, mouthing a meal of tasteless hay from a rick, a draught of murky water from a bucket, nothing like the spill of this cold and continually fresh spring. They had not died, but they understood somehow they had gone to horse heaven. There was a 7-acre pasture to run. Often at night there was a moon. There were apples and carrots and frozen watermelon rinds. And there was the man I was, waiting with them, waiting for them as they waited for and with me. And once one of them nickered or shook a head, that immemorial equine interrogatory, I produced from my miraculous pocket 2 final cubes of sugar, which they ate with something like ecstasy. After which I walked back to the house and sat on the porch and waited for them, as they always did on some days, and as they did that day, to run around the pasture once or twice in their joy, which was beloved by me. My wife and I spent 53 nights camped at our favorite spot on our favorite river in North Idaho, fishing, riding, hanging out this summer between early July and mid-October. This is a poem about being there. It's called Chorus. She wasn't there when I started playing, and it's a song I have not played in a long time, so it requires a little extra concentration from me, which is why she seems so suddenly just to be, appearing there in the empty space before the porch of the shack and looking up, and most of all, listening. For dear, always listen. They can hear
Oh,
you lick your the second time. Of the title. I've slowed the song way down and I'm finger picking, not pounding with a pick. And with its 3 minor chords, it sounds almost like a ballad, or slow and sad at least. And even the yeahs, I admit, I try to work a little extra from. So yeah, it occurs to me that indeed I am performing for a deer. And I want her not only to appreciate the miraculous fact of human music, but also of me, performing for her. Hell, I'm playing and singing to her, all the while aware, despite her beauty, her impossibly big brown eyes, her listening, that it would never work out between us. It's a mild day in late autumn. She's probably pregnant. I'm older than half the tree around us, but the look tense, so pure in its regard that it feels like everything else in the world has gone to that place everything else in the world goes to when you are looked at that way, especially if you're singing. And the worst thing that could happen at such a time is for the song to end. So I keep singing. She loves you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And finally,
Robert, excuse me. If you can hear me, Robert, this is Heather.
yeah,
The sound is a
I can
little
hear
bit,
you.
the sound is a little bit bumpy, and I'm wondering if we might be able to hear it better. And I know we'd like to see you, but if you turned your video off, we may be able to hear the poem a little more clearly. Is that possible, do you think?
No,
There's
I
just a delay. It's not.
can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Then just continue then.
Okay, hit stop.
I'm not sure. That might be better though. Try it.
Hello.
Maybe not. I don't think it actually makes much difference, Robert. And it's nice to see you. So okay,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Should I proceed with the final poem?
Yes. It sounds much better now.
Okay. This poem is called Synovial. I think the title will be explained by the poem if you wind up hearing it. Joint fluid, said the physician, spilled from a sprung seal in the ultimate knuckle of my left index finger, just shy of the nail, and gathering there to a myxoid cyst, a substance also called digital mucus. Once a woman with beautiful hands said to me, there are very few physical pleasures without a little mucus. But when this doctor, with an expensive lancet, lanced it, there oozed from my myxoid cyst a viscous substance vastly more limpid than semen or vaginal secretions. It was like a tear wept by a fly-sized golden butterfly. And when I touched the tiny glistening orb of it with the pad of my opposite index finger, it clung to the prince whirl. And when I swirled it against the pad of my thumb, I understood my body will never repay me for the satisfactions I give it every day by moving. Oh, itty bitty, pure lubricious gobbet. Oh, most licentious and merest wit betwixt the pads of index finger and thumb, slid together so lusciously, the joints between my carpal and metacarpal bones thrummed a hum through every atom of my corpus, this side of corpsehood, all the way back to the slither and divot of my conception, which the doctor, seeing the look on my face, closed his eyes before the lust and rapture of. That's it.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert. Could you just again for us list the titles of the poems that you read, because I think we may end up posting some, because that one was great. We lost a little bit of 4/7, and if you just
Yeah, well, I read Being a Lake, Horse Heaven, Chorus, and Synovial.
we won't forget Synovial.
Well, good.
I'd like for maybe the three of you to, if in the last, we've got a few minutes left here. You go ahead and talk about anything you want to. It looks like Elizabeth and Sean might have a thought or a question, but one of the things that has come up in these readings is just, what poetry's role, what the writer's role may be in these times of arguably shared crisis. But
Well,
you can actually go ahead and talk about anything you want.
following that poem, I'd like to say poems can bring joy. Because that was such joy to hear. It just made me laugh and giggle in a junior high kind of way, but also appreciate in an adult aging kind of way. And that
Right.
yeah. That joy, that's what poems can do.
Well, I think poems can offer truth in some way or another, and in times like these, truth is a vanishing commodity. We seem to be at the mercy of falsehoods and at the mercy of denial, and poets should, and I think do, refuse to be at the mercy of falsehood and denial.
And refuse to be at the mercy of certainty. I think poems can offer a demonstration of questioning and grappling and uncertainty. How do we understand complexity? There are so many complex things that are happening right now, and multiple feelings on multiple registers, multiple layers of information. And a poem can allow those to exist for a while without canceling each other out. And I think just sitting with complexity is one thing that I need to do in this moment, without trying to decide and figure things out, and that I hope that poems can afford me also.
Yes, all of those things. Yeah. They are articulations and amplifications of our experiences and the truths that we need to hear. And yeah, they are wonderful and joyful, or they can be. And yeah, I think they can do a lot, but I feel like as a poet, sometimes in a moment like this, I need to do other things too. Continue to be a poet, but also be an organizer of something. For me, in my case, it's just like trying to get together a reading series and conferences and just connect people. Poetry is about connection and connecting readers to experiences, connecting me to the world. And so I, as a poet, need to do that in various ways right now.
Are these times when both of you have written about the high bun? Basically, it's like cliff notes for a poet. It sounds like, or shorthand for a poet would be the right term. Is that something that, in the middle of this, is it difficult to be full-on creative writing a poem, and is that something that you're looking at, just sort of taking notes for later, or are you actually composing now? And that's for Robert too.
I'm taking notes right now, but I do sometimes end up shaping those notes into things that are, I do begin composing, but I feel like right now, mostly what I can do is try to keep track of things that are going on, because so much seems to be happening every day. I'd written a couple of pieces that I ended up writing addendums to recently. Like things just like keep piling on. Oh, there's another thing that has happened that has to be dealt with. So yeah, writing notes, writing as much as I can, trying to wrestle with language in this time is kind of the when I feel like I'm doing some good for myself in the world.
I think this time is what we're reading in the news, but it's also what we're experiencing on the day-to-day on the ground, whether that's seasonal shifts or engagements with neighbors. And I think for me, I've kind of gone in and out of being responsive to the moment. I was writing a poem a day for the first 5 months of this year, which felt really great. And sometimes they'd be very engaged with the right now of my daily life. And sometimes they'd be, moments of my imaginative life, which is not always in direct correlation to my daily life. And I think I want to leave room for both of those ways of operation to happen. And that maybe also ways that I respond to this current moment might not be in poems at all. It might be in political activism. It might be in marches on the streets. It might be in supporting or writing letters or other things. And I'm not sure that I'm always going to ask poetry to do everything that needs to be done in this moment. Sometimes poetry for me needs to be a refuge, and that's okay too, as long as I'm not backing away from everything that's happening in this moment and what I care about in other parts of my life.
The late Jim Harrison once said somewhere in one of his journals, "One day I realized that all the bullshit I was trying to escape in my life was my life." And we're swimming in a sea of bullshit, and it's easy to be distracted, and it's difficult sometimes to be creative, and it's difficult sometimes to try to cope with both the world and the demands of what it means to see the world in a generous and helpful way. But you keep on trying. You keep on doing it. You go back to the page, you go back to the language and see what it can tell you and where it can take you. And if you're lucky, every now and then you might find your way to something that reaches somebody somewhere. I'm out here, I'm just invisible.
Thank you very much. And we've reached the end of our hour, and I know you all have busy lives, and I know that Sean's little boy is out for a walk and might want to come in at this point, and it's late for Elizabeth and for Robert. So thank you very much for your generosity in being here this evening. And I want to thank all of you again for joining this reading event in the AQR 40th anniversary literary series, and ask you again to please consider making a donation to AQR so that you can hear more fine poets like this, and they get a chance to publish their work and go on to be who they are. And that you join us next Sunday when we are going to host Diana Nayeri and Celeste Ng. I'd also like to thank Rebecca at the Anchorage Museum and the Rasmussen Center, and Cody, and anyway, terrific. And I don't know if Ron wants to say a few parting words, but thank you so much for all of you. You're such an inspiration to me, and I could be here for hours, but I know you've got lives to get going, so thank you.
Yes, I want to thank you, Heather, for dedicating so much of your time, not only already, but in the future. And I want to tell our viewers that the event next week is at a different time. It's earlier because Dina Nieri is coming on from Paris, France, and Celeste is in Massachusetts, and we're here in Alaska. So we'll have a 10 a.m. start in Anchorage, 2 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 p.m. in Paris. So you can have brunch here or dinner in Europe. Thank you again, everybody, and thank you to the Alaska Museum and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts.
Thank you, and be safe, everybody. Have a good week, and hopefully take care of yourselves. And if you can, take care of somebody else too.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. So great to hear poems.
Yes, yes.
Everybody have a good week.
Just
and
a second,
hopefully,
I'm stopping.
take care of yourselves, and if you can, take care of somebody else too.
Hey, thank you, Sean and Liz.
Yeah.
And Robert, if he's still there.
Perfect. And we're
Yeah.
at